Coming up tonight, he led the country through some of the most historically trying times. But between his handling of affairs in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian and the lockdowns during the pandemic, former Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis soon lost favor with the Bahamian people. Tonight, in his own words, the decisions he made and the very expensive lessons learned. Also tonight, Dr. Minnis addresses some decisions that are being made or under consideration by the Davis administration, like the proroguing of the House, the new Governor General, and sending 150 Bahamians to Haiti. He weighs in on all of it. And the police are here as well. They speak out after a second young girl is sexually assaulted. One women's organization this week is criticizing the police for their treatment of a recent victim, an adult in this instance. We hear from the police tonight on how they address sexual assaults in the country and the increasing numbers as well. This is Beyond the Headlines, brought to you by Alive. Good evening. I'm Shenique Miller. It's great to have you along this evening. Well, Dr. Minnis, of course, is the former Prime Minister here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. He was voted out of office in 2017, and he's here this evening. We're going to jump right into it. And so I want to welcome you to Beyond the Headlines. I know that you probably haven't done many interviews. You have been interviewed in Parliament and outside Parliament, etc. But to sit here, I am grateful that you're here. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Shenique. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I am happy to be here with you.
Thank you very, very much. And so let's get started. We have a lot to get through, and I hope we can get through most of it. And so you've been trending for a few months now. People, including the media, are paying attention to your views on various national issues and a whole lot more. In fact, they seek you out to hear a number of things that you are your opinions on a whole number of issues that are happening in Frontline right now. Are we watching, Dr. Minnis, your re-entry, your perhaps journey back to contending for leadership of the Free National Movement?
See, at this point in time, I am the representative for Kalani. I go in Parliament, I do my work, I do my preparation, and I represent Kalani to the best of my ability. What happens to me tomorrow, day after tomorrow, only God can answer that question. I can't. But in the meantime, I remain focused and continue to represent my constituency as the best I can.
So what we're seeing is not sort of your campaign to somehow become leader of the Free National Movement again?
What you're seeing is me representing my constituency, expressing the voice and the concern of my constituency. They're concerned with many issues that are happening today. And when I go in Parliament, I search those areas thoroughly and speak out on those areas, on those matters.
Mm-hmm. What is your relationship like with the present leader of the Free National Movement, Michael Pintard?
Michael Pintard is the leader of the Free National Movement. He's my leader. I respect leadership. And I've always said, leadership or respect is a two-way street. It cannot be one way.
Oh, so what's going on? There's some lack of respect?
Again, I said I respect leadership.
Yes, you do.
But respect must always be two-way street.
I think there's a little something there that we can explore, but we're not here. But we have a lot to talk about, so we're not going to dwell there. Okay, that's fine. I take your word for it. You have had a number of getting to really the meat of this interview. A number of major incidents, national disasters in Hurricane Dorian. Then, of course, the pandemic soon after, during your time as Prime Minister, that people still to this day talk about. I'm sure you hear it as you move about, want answers to, or perhaps Dr. Minnis will explain this, explain that, etc. What would you say impacted you most as Prime Minister?
First of all, when one accepts the job of Prime Minister, you must be prepared to make very difficult decisions. Decisions that you personally may not necessarily like, but decisions that are in the best interest of the country. And they may be difficult decisions. That's a job I accepted, and that's a job I did. And I would say the same thing to the existing Prime Minister. His decisions must be twofold. He must always protect the institution, that is the office of the Prime Minister, and he must always protect the country. And therefore, decisions that he make to protect those two entities may be decisions that he himself do not personally like, but they are in the best interest of the country, and you must make those decisions.
Okay, well, let's just talk about decisions being made that personally you may not like. I know the glaring one is the pandemic and the lockdowns, but let's start first with Hurricane Dorian. And I don't want to, we know what happened. We know it was the worst storm in the history and on records for maybe 100 years or more. But let's just talk about how long it took your government in the burial of many people who lost their lives several months after, and the whole mix-up and all that took place during that time. And when it took place, it just appeared very much not planned out, not thought out properly, and really just really heart-wrenching to watch it all play out. What was going on during that time that all of that took place the way it did, and that it played out for the people of Abaco and the country as we all watched and wondered why?
I would say a few words about Dorian. But before I touch Dorian, Shenique, when we came in office, I had quite a number of challenges. Very soon after coming in office, we were hit with Hurricane Irma. And Irma was bellowing through the southern Bahama Islands. I'm trained as a physician. I'm a doctor. And first and foremost, I'm trained to save lives. There were a lot of Bahamians who would have been placed in the harm's way of this hurricane. And we decided to do something that was never done before. We air evacuated the residents from the south and brought them here to New Providence and other northern islands out of harm's way of the hurricane. When we first spoke about it, many felt that it could not be done because it's never been done. But first and foremost was getting those individuals out of harm's way of the hurricane. And we were successful. Nobody died. All lives were saved, after which they were sent back to their respective island. Then Dorian came. Dorian was a hurricane that nobody has ever seen. It's Category 5. And when we went to visit the aftermath of the hurricane, it was something that I've never, ever envisaged. I've never seen concrete blocks and buildings actually brought down to powder. It was like an atomic bomb came through. And the major challenges at that time, the government structure had broken down. There was no governance.
On the island of Abaco?
On the island of Abaco after the hurricane. The leadership within the office of the Prime Minister there, the permanent secretary, had left the island prematurely, so there was no one there. There was no governance. The infrastructure, light, water, and other bridges were destroyed. Abaco was actually cut in two. It was two separate islands. A bridge that was just recently built by the former government was completely demolished, and therefore the island was cut in two. So there were debris all over the island. Homes were devastated. Administrative offices were devastated. So you can imagine we faced a situation where there were no governance, infrastructure gone, light, water. There were challenges with the healthcare system. And first and foremost was you had to ensure that these are replaced. And I understand if I was an individual and that had happened to me, human nature is that I want my home back tomorrow. That's human nature. And I would have felt the same way. But even before you can do all those things, it's essential for you to replace the infrastructure, rebuild it. And security is very important. That was a lesson we learned. And we did not really get security under control until we had gotten the defense force from one of the Caribbean countries, Jamaica, with the assistance of Barbados and Trinidad, and they assisted us with security. But so we had to rebuild an entire infrastructure. We had to rebuild the lighting system. We had to reintroduce water. We had to build a bridge. Roads were destroyed. We had to rebuild roads. Docks were destroyed. We had to rebuild docks. And we embarked on those, but at the same time, you have to provide some form of accommodation for the people.
So you were saying you had all of this to try and navigate and make happen at the same time. So the fact that and at the same time you were recovering remains.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So who made the decision that let those remains remain there?
No. We were identifying as many as the remains as we possibly can. However, you must understand that we would not have known who the particular individuals are in terms of the bodies. And therefore, we had to do DNA testing. And we tried to explain that to individuals that DNA testing was important. DNA testing was being delayed and taking a long time, and we had to make decisions. And therefore, we decided that the best thing to do is take a sample from each body, preserve that sample so that we can do the testing later as individuals come and present themselves and say they had lost their loved ones. So we can do a DNA match from them so that we can identify the body, and wherever we place the body in which particular graveyard, that would have been logged so that we know that DNA identity for such and such an individual place in this part. That's right.
So this is how this all dragged
and that was
along.
delayed. That was the delay.
But,
and
so
even
family,
today, you will find that if you, the police and those will tell you that if they're doing investigation, one of the challenges is getting a quick report in DNA.
So families were notified.
Yes.
Now, one thing with your administration, it looked bad because while, of course, that really wasn't any of our business, that was just truly the families. But the country wasn't notified, so a lot of narratives were being built and shared. Did you not think it necessary? And while I know it's very sensitive and only the family should be aware of things like that, but just maybe so that the country knows, listen, your government was working, your government is busy trying to do all these things at once, including speak with family members.
One of the greatest follies of my government and the greatest follies of FNM, it is the FNM party. It has always plagued us, communication. And I would take responsibility for that. As leaders take responsibility. Our communication, both in Dorian and the pandemic, was not as best as possible. And there must be a lot of improvement in communication, not only among my party, but also the entire government structure. Communication.
Well, I tell you, I think this administration communicates certainly a million times better. But let's move on. You mentioned the pandemic. Let's talk about the lockdowns. I know you have been hit with this directly, and you've seen it all over the media and social media. The competent authority. And the competent authority, many times, in fact, just this week I heard people say it, and I know you hear it. They want to hear you talk about it. What went into the rationale sometimes of having a news conference, and everybody was on pins and needles, I imagine you too, the world was, but having a news conference and saying a lockdown, today is Thursday, tomorrow is a lockdown, and many people felt as though, what happened? What's this sporadic action about? Why not give families a time to be even prepared to wrap it around their minds, to go and shop and to go and get this and the next thing? Explain all that madness that was happening and also trying to figure it out as you try to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Shenique, let me explain this. First of all, quite a number of Bahamians died during the pandemic. I think about 844, and I extend my condolence to those families who had lost loved ones. First and foremost, Shenique, I am a physician. I'm a doctor. I have taken an oath, the Hippocratic Oath. That oath especially is in twofold. we must always save lives, and we must always maintain and improve the quality of life. That's first and foremost. I took those oaths, and I live by them. The pandemic was a viral infection, virus coming through. I had read and studied the Spanish flu, and I understood and know what damages the Spanish flu could have done. When the Spanish flu came through, some estimated that there were about 50 million people that died. Some said it's 100 million. And communities were completely obliterated in terms of death. Some communities were completely destroyed because of the number of deaths and no longer existed. The lesson learned from the Spanish flu was that those who had aggressively managed the flu,
meaning the governments and countries.
That's right, the countries that aggressively managed the flu in terms of closing schools, in terms of decreasing gathering, they had a better outcome. But first and foremost, in my mind and in our mind, was lives must be saved and quality of life must remain or improve. And therefore the professionals, inclusive of the World Health Organization, who would have been even more knowledgeable about pandemic, the Spanish flu, the number of deaths and how it was managed, they would have been more knowledgeable than I and others were. And they would have basically guided us as to how to minimize the impact, because that would have always been in the forefront. The Spanish flu itself came in 3 waves. Therefore, you knew that with this pandemic, you have a pattern to follow. You have something you can fall back on and learn. So we were guided by WHO and other professionals, and we followed those. I, on the other hand, as Prime Minister, I'm chairman of Cabinet, the voice of Cabinet. And therefore, after being guided by the professionals, advised what to do, what would be the best thing to do in terms of maintaining our Hippocratic oath, life and quality of life. I would have made the various announcements as to the recommendation put forth, and that would have been done. Now, when you talk about quality of life, one of the challenges you would have had with quality of life, you know, once you were following the direction in terms of isolation, closing schools, etc., businesses, churches, the whole idea of decreasing gathering as much as possible. You know that one of the challenges you would have is how were these people going to feed themselves under these challenges when the whole world was doing basically the same thing, because the whole world, again, was under the guidance of the WHO. And that's why we had to come up with a plan, the food plan, to ensure that everyone had adequate food. We knew that social service couldn't do it, and we had involved the NGOs, and I thought they did an excellent job.
Well, you know, you got hit hard for that. Let's jump right on, because I know this show is only an hour, and we don't have an hour. The food program, we're going to pick up right there. Listen, this is a special conversation with former Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis. We're trying to get in as many questions as possible, and also responses to a number of what's happening now in the Davis administration as well from him. But we want to talk about the food program that he just mentioned. Why the private run food program versus not using the existing programs that were already in place? We're going to ask him that question when we come back right here on Beyond the Headlines. Stay with us. We're back right after this. Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines, brought to you by Alive. We are this evening having a one-on-one with former Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis. We're going to jump right back into this and pick up with the food program. We are discussing, of course, many decisions and actions taken by his administration during the pandemic. And I want to ask you, Dr. Minnis, thank you again for being here. I'd like to ask you, why was Susan Larson paid the amount she was paid to run a privately, I guess, operated food program when that bulk of money, and it escapes me at the moment, but boy, I tell you, I could do with that. But that bulk of money could have been used to add to more food on people's plates during the pandemic when jobs and all that stuff was happening, joblessness.
First, I thought Susan Larson did an excellent job. She was paid under the standard payment plan for those type of organizations and type of work that she did. So that was nothing special. Susan Larson, during Dorian, several times I and others came through Odysseys Airport. And when we looked and saw the type of program that was organized and ran from that center, individuals came in, they knew their name, they knew their addresses, they knew where to place them, they knew exactly where they were, they ensured that they get adequate food, adequate supply, and it was all computerized. It was done marvelous. And her name would have been in the hat, and she was subsequently selected because of her track record, her accomplishments, what she had done, etc.
So she was recommended you because of how she handled, her and her team handled Dorian.
Her management skills and the excellent job, especially she has done previously and with Dorian. The food program, that you know that if you're following the medical advice, it means that you're keeping individuals isolated away from each other, be it lockdowns or whatever you want to call it. And you must be able to deliver food to them. They were able to discuss with all of the various agencies, food supply companies, so that we would get the best prices, discounts, etc. And I want to thank those agencies who would have sold us food at reduced minimal profit to themselves. ACH, Pritchard, etc., and thank them all for assisting us. So Lawson and those, and so social services admitted that they could not do it. They admitted that they could not do it. And Lawson and those had the organizational skills to bring all of the NGOs together so that the NGOs would be involved in delivering food to various people. The NGOs were doing that before. So that was nothing new. That was something they were accustomed to. But what was most important, what I liked about the recommendation from Lawson, you can imagine individuals who try to get politics involved, and some may have felt that the food should be distributed from their constituency office. And that was one of the conditions. That the food cannot be distributed from any member of parliament constituency office, because then it would become political.
Let it be done independently so that whoever needs food
They were not concerned about your politics. And therefore, no political office, my own nor others. There was one particular office that was used. That was Glenys Hannah Martin's office in Engliston. But that was because her office was already being used by NGOs for years to distribute food. So that was her office was already a part of a food distribution center. So obviously that would be incorporated. So, and I totally agreed with that move, that it could not be involved in any MP's constituency office.
Right.
And Lawson and those lived and insisted that that happened, because they did not want to know any individual's political leaning. All they wanted to know was that this individual needed assistance and they were going to get it.
Let's talk about this administration has charged you with causing the economy to come to a standstill. We know that there were a number of thousands of furloughs, businesses closing, joblessness, people losing their jobs, so much going on with the economy that was happening at the same time. Would it explain to us the actions and some of the actions you took, but of course, let the Bahamian people understand What happened in this regard? Yes, of course, you explained the fact that as much as possible to make minimum gatherings happen so that this would not spread. But explain to the Bahamian people exactly how you addressed and handled that.
Okay, Shenique. I said earlier that my training is one, save lives, the Hippocratic Oath, save lives, and two, maintain and improve the quality of life. Most countries around the world were laying off individuals, were furloughing them, so unemployment would have been going up. We felt that that was not the proper thing to do here in the Bahamas, because we felt that if I want to maintain with my Hippocratic Oath, and I lay off those individuals, public servants, I laid off. Those from Bahamas Air, National Flight Service, I laid those individuals off. It meant that how were those individuals going to feed their families? How were they going to pay their bills? I would have been going totally against my training in terms of maintaining the quality of life. Their quality of life would have decreased. And therefore, that was one example we could not follow the world with. Now you would note that countries like the US, they subsequently came out and gave bailouts to certain segments.
Yeah.
We felt that we had to maintain the quality of life within the Bahamas. We could not introduce this additional stress and decrease in quality. So we had to do a similar thing. We had to do a bailout for the Bahamas. We never spoke about it in that term, but we did a bailout for the Bahamas well in excess of $1.3 billion.
Explain to us how you did that.
I will explain that. $1.3 billion bailout to the Bahamian people to ensure that nobody's quality of life would have decreased and to ensure that they would have been safe and saved lives. Now, how did we do that? We maintained all those individuals at Bahamas Air and public servants. That in itself, in terms of employment, in 2019, 2020, that in itself would have been over $650 million that the government would have been paying out to individuals in spite of them not working. At the same time, we did that the following year. Then we introduced, we made sure that individuals got unemployment benefits. That was an additional $115 million. Then we paid an additional $53 million to businesses to ensure that they maintain the employment of those individuals, kept their people employed. And we also gave businesses tax credit. So they got money to keep their businesses open. That was a part of our bailout. Over $1.3 billion bailout to save this Bahamian economy. Now, had we not done that, the Bahamian economy would have crashed. Now, how? Let me explain that. And I want the Bahamian people to listen to me very carefully.
Talk to them right here.
Listen to me very carefully. Imagine the public servants, Bahamas Air, NASA Flight Service, the taxi drivers, the unemployed, the self-employed, all receiving money from government, They had bills. Foreclosures would have increased in this country. Foreclosures would have increased. That was avoided. They were able to purchase food for their families. They were able to pay their light bill. In addition to that, we had decreased the light bills for many individuals, allowed them incentives to ensure that their lights remained on, right? So the banks, because monies were going to the banks, that is, mortgages were paid, other bills were being met, what it meant is that the banks were able to maintain their staffing. And therefore, the banks in the financial sector was able to maintain still a small degree of profitability. So the US and them, yes, they would have done the bailouts for the airline industry, But we did a bailout for the entire Bahamas. So we and because those individuals had money to spend, the domestic economy continued. There were money flowing through the domestic economy so that the individuals on the side of the street or who were doing little odds and ends, they too were making money because you were still spending money. So over $1.3 billion bailout to save this economy. And therefore, the banks did not crash. The financial sectors did not crash. Many homes were not furloughed, all right? Monies were flowing through the economy. The mom and pop stores in the inner cities, they were getting money because individuals were being paid, and therefore they could purchase and spend there. So now, when you open up, your economy was already in some degree of profitability and can move quite rapidly. If we had not done that, the Bahamas would have seen the degree of financial disaster that they could not have imagined. Over 1.3, and I'm being conservative, over $1.3 billion in bailout to ensure that money was flowing through our economy, business was maintained, jobs were maintained, though not working, paid, banks were maintained.
So while it was a slow flow, you're saying had you not taken those steps, it would have absolutely come to a screeching halt.
Because what would have happened, imagine, the public servants, they can't pay their mortgages, they can't pay their car bills, they can't pay other expenses that they have. And what happened? That caused additional stress to them. What would that have caused to the health sector? The mental anger would have subsequently increased. We controlled all of that.
Well, listen, I could ask you more about that, but again, I'm just trying to get in as many. You mentioned the person on the side of the street. There were a number of, I guess, missteps and gaffes and stumbles. Which do you think is the worst thing that happened and further vexed the Bahamian people? The Coconut Boys who were arrested, the Harbor Island wedding that we saw the tourists dancing so gleefully nice while everybody else was shut down and locked in, or the woman who was granted access for her dog to come because, you know, she wanted to bury him.
I don't remember the details of most of them. But what I would say, when you're introducing into your country and you're faced with something that was never, ever dreamt of. No one has ever faced a pandemic before. No one. It means that because my medical knowledge, I had a better understanding and can work with the medical professionals and WHO, etc. And that's why I said one of our greatest follies is failure in communication.
Yeah.
That was one of our greatest follies. And I take responsibility as leader for that.
But
and
you must admit those things you must admit those look bad though.
Yes,
when we saw the videos going out.
Because individuals, because they may not necessarily have understood the impact of a pandemic and what it could do to them personally in terms of death, they would have taken it lightly. And others who understood a little may have been over-aggressive, etc. But whatever they did, whatever the police did, whatever others did, they did specifically to save lives. That was first and foremost.
Dr. Minnis, let's quickly talk about Wärtsilä. I know this is no quick issue, but you were also accused, this administration, as all governments do, figure they can expose something with the former, that you brought in excellent engines, fine, I think it was 7 in total, but what you put it in was akin to a pig pen, not conducive to having this type of engines in that state, and so obviously something that would have led to failure.
Shenique, when we came in, the greatest cry within the private sector, the business community, was the cost of electricity. We were haunted left, right, and center by the public because there were many load shedding. We were haunted by the public and the business community. You must solve this problem. We cannot advance the country with the problems with load shedding and the cost of electricity. You must bring those down. We looked at it and we addressed that. We bought Wärtsilä's engines, etc. And they talk about the buildings, The reports are there. The reports are there. Engineering reports. The buildings were sound. They talk about the engines had challenges. Those engines were built by Wärtsilä. And yes, during the first few months, they had problems with what we call the exhaust manifold structural support system. And therefore, a little of the engines were vibrating. They were the specialists. They built the engine. They recognized that. And they fixed that 2 years ago. So what the government is talking about is rubbish. They fixed that 2 years ago. All right? The 7 engines were running. When we bought Wärtsilä, we were paying, because of Wärtsilä, it was costing 2 cents per kilowatt hour for generation. The other engines that BPL had, be it at Clifton or Blue Hills, they were paying 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So we brought that down to 2 cents. And hence, we had the lowest light bill ever recorded in this country.
I was about to ask you that. I was just about to ask you that.
Now, what are they doing? When we came, there was about 80 kilowatt energy supply that was leased energy, 80 kilowatt engines that were leased. We subsequently built a new station, and while building the station, obviously you would have had to lease, and therefore that leased component went up to 115 during construction. And when we left, we had brought it down to 50. 50 kilowatt energy supply is being leased. So we brought it down, we met at 80, we took it down to 50, and we were taking it down further. Already, this government has taken the leased component up to 115 kilowatt energy. So they are increasing leased.
Explain
the question that needs to be asked,
yes.
Wärtsilä was 2 cents per kilowatt hour. The engines that BPL and those had were 6 cents per kilowatt hour. We still do not know how much we're paying for the leased engine. Is it 10 cents? Is it 12 cents? Thus contributing to our cost.
To the increase in cost.
And then the other question, did they follow the BPL's manual of the bidding process, procurement process, to ensure that we got the best leased prices for the leased engines? So we don't know that. So what they are doing indirectly, they are privatizing BPL under our noses, and we don't know. Because remember, your leased engine moved from 50 when we left up to now 115 and continuing to rise, and they have not told us whether they followed the procurement process in terms of bidding, or they have not told us. We know that Wärtsilä was 2 cents per kilowatt hour. We know that BPL's other infrastructure that we met is 6 cents, and we still do not know how much we're paying, and hence we're having these heavy, hefty light bills.
Well, everyone is complaining about it, and of course the power outages, that subsequent power outages as well, just with again, engine issues, failure after failure, load shedding, all the rest of it. The hedge fund, I don't know if we do we need to go into that? I know it's something that your administration...
No, yes, what happened is, how did we bring the cost of energy down? How did we bring it down? We hedged, all right? We introduced the hedge, and they allowed it to fall. We introduced the Wärtsilä engine and brought it down. What did they do? They released the management team of Wärtsilä and subsequently brought in their own. And in addition to that, they did not follow the maintenance manual, which tell you exactly when maintenance are supposed to be done, etc. They did not follow that, and hence they ran into problems, right? And now they're coming on and making statements left, right, and center. Wärtsilä is a world-renowned company. They must be very careful what they say, because the logs are there. Before they talk, they can, I've asked them repeatedly, table the logs in Parliament so that we can see. when the engines and how the engines were maintained, what were any challenges. It's all, the records are there. Wärtsilä has those records also. They must be careful what they say, because they can set themselves up for litigation. Now, I don't know whether Wärtsilä would do that, but if it's done, I would hope that they don't only sue the government, but those individuals, those managers who went and talk bad about various different entities when they know it's not true. I hope they are named in the suit so that they pay and not you or I.
I don't know if you can answer a question in a sentence, because this is the break right here. Your thoughts on possibly sending 150 armed force men and women of the Bahamas to Haiti?
Shenique, I've said before, the UN said they are bringing forth a resolution. They would debate and discuss the resolution, after which they would make a determination as to sending troops to Haiti. I said we should bring a resolution to Parliament so that we can debate it. The UN, the governing body, gonna debate it. But we want to jump the gun and say we're going to send people when the Commodore...
the Prime Minister did say it depends on what the UN decides.
Yeah, but should we not debate it also? Because the Commodore didn't know. The Commodore is in the paper saying he's hearing it for the first time. How could you commit 150 individuals? The Commodore don't know when he have to man our borders. He have to deal with human trafficking. He have to deal with pouches. You need to discuss so you'd have your manpower. That's one component. And
we only have time for one.
I say one thing which is important.
Okay.
One thing which is important. What happens if individuals go off and come back in body bags? What happened to that family? What happens to that family? Are you going to take care of those children straight through to university? All of those have to be answered.
Your thoughts on Mother Pratt being named, Cynthia Mother Pratt being named new Governor General?
I love Mother Pratt. Mother Pratt has done well for this country, and the Prime Minister has made that choice. He, you know, when we came, the policy has always been you leave the existing governor in place for at least 2 years or whatever. He's followed that policy, and that is his right to choose. And I think she's an excellent lady. When she was there, we had a good relationship.
In 30 seconds, I hear it. In 30 seconds, why and should the Bahamian people trust you again?
I am a trustworthy fella. I am a trustworthy fella. But you're asking her, I know where you're leading. But
I'm just asking.
I know where you're leading.
I'm just asking.
I know where you're leading. But I'm a trustworthy fella. If I promise you something, I'm going to do it.
I thank you very much. I have more questions, and I know you perhaps want to discuss more issues that are happening. You are certainly welcome to this platform again. The invitation is open. Is that a deal?
Thank you very much.
Okay,
That's
thank you. Thank you very, very much.